Hey everybody, welcome to Q Plus EDU. My name is Frederick. My pronouns are they, them. I am Out Youth's Texas Gender and Sexuality Alliance Network Coordinator, and I am super thrilled that you are here today with us for Sex Ed Q&A. And I will pass it over to E, who will be moderating the chat, and then we will get started. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Hi everyone, I'm E. I use they, them pronouns. I am the founder of Q Plus EDU, and like Frederick said, I'll be here moderating the chat. So we do have some questions that were submitted ahead of time, and we're going to run through those, but as this presentation keeps going, if you think of other questions, feel free to drop those either in the chat or the Q&A, either one is fine. And I'm also putting a link to the Google form in the chat if you still would prefer to ask questions anonymously. We'll be checking that form throughout this presentation. So yeah, I'll turn it over to our awesome sex educators to go ahead and introduce themselves and get started.
Do you mind if I go first?
Sure.
All right, I'm jumping in. So hi, my name is Jessica. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm with Unhushed, which provides comprehensive sexuality education, primarily K through 12, but we dabble in everything. My favorite age groups to work with are pre-K and fourth grade because they ask the funniest questions. And answering questions is literally like one of the best parts about being a sex educator. So I'm very excited for today.
My name is Ryan Dillon, and I am a therapist here in Austin, and I specialize in working with the queer and sex-positive communities. And I have also been working with Unhushed since 2016, and I teach middle school and high school students.
Yeah, so I think, Ryan, the first question is yours.
So the first question we have, and if you see me looking to the side, that's because I'm reading the screen next to me. The first question is PrEP necessary for individuals who are not having sex? And also, when would PrEP be an option? So the first part of that, I'm just going to explain what PrEP is. So PrEP stands for pre-exposure prophylaxis. I almost got that word out without any issue. So PrEP is an amazing medication that people can take, and it lowers the possibility of contracting HIV. And it's not just for people having sex. A lot of the times that's where it's marketed towards, but it can also be marketed towards people who use drugs or people who are sexually active with people who like use injectable drugs. So it's not just for people who have sex. It depends on what the person does. So if the person uses injectable drugs or sexually active, that would be depending on if someone needs to be on PrEP. Also, when would PrEP be an option? That is going to be dependent on where you are at. So a lot of people with parental permission can be put on PrEP before the age of 18. And then we have a couple of really good clinics here in Austin. If you're located here in Austin, like Jessica and I are, the Kind Clinic and Asheville Clinic are amazing places that prescribe PrEP. PrEP is usually covered by insurance. However, that is going to, of course, be dependent on your insurance. But if you don't have insurance, there are programs that can be put on, and Kind Clinic and Asheville Clinic are very good about getting their patients on these programs that cover the cost of PrEP. So those are really, really good clinics to go to. Your primary Your primary care provider can prescribe PrEP. But Kind Clinic and Asheville are so used to getting people on that plan that makes sure it's covered for you. So I always encourage people to check out those types of clinics.
Okay, so our next questions, there's two of them, but I'm going to answer them together because they kind of feed into one another. So number one, can lesbians get STIs even if neither of them have had one? And number two, are there any forms of protection you can use for lesbian sex? So first off, I'm going to let you know I'm making an assumption here that whenever it says lesbian sex, you're talking about sexual activity that involves people with vulvas, because obviously people who are ladies have lots of different parts. So if we're just talking about, though, sexual interactions of people with vulvas, so STIs in general, which are sexually transmitted infections, also they've been known as sexually transmitted diseases. STIs is a little bit more accurate than STDs, but they describe the exact same thing. They just change the name of that group of like infections every 20 or so years. It used to be venereal disease or VD, and we'll probably get a new name, in a couple of decades. But STIs describe a group of diseases infections that can be transmitted through sexual activity, but a lot of them can also be transmitted in different ways. Herpes, for example, can be transmitted through saliva transmission. So that's like oral herpes, which is just like when you have a cold sore, that's what that is. Oral herpes can be transmitted through saliva. So like if you have a mom kissing her kid, that can potentially transmit herpes. And that's obviously a non-sexual form of transmission. But because herpes can be transmitted sexually, it fits under this umbrella. So could somebody with a vulva, or anybody really, get an STI if they don't have one? Like, and nobody involved has one? No, because they don't STIs don't magically be like, oh, somebody's having sex, I'm gonna fly into your house, I'm gonna get you. Somebody has to have them to transmit it. But if you don't have one, then it's not something you worry about. However, like the phrase that gets thrown around a lot that's really cheesy is the whole like the most common symptom of STIs is no symptom at all, which is dumb, but it's also true. Like a lot of times they're asymptomatic. So it's something that you do need to, if you've potentially been exposed to STIs, you can go get testing for. There's free and reduced cost testing at lots of different places, depends where you are in the country. If you're looking for places to get testing, a good place to start is your county health offices. So like here in Austin, Travis or Williamson County health offices can have resources to tell you about what testing they offer and maybe talk about other sites that have other testing resources. Planned Parenthood also can offer that. So in terms of protection for any activity involving vulvas, so we wouldn't be using external condoms that go on a penis, but there are internal condoms, which are condoms that can be inserted into the vagina. Those condoms can also be inserted into the anus. There's dental dams, which are basically just like a flat sheet of latex. You can actually create a dental dam by cutting the side of a external condom, but sometimes people call a male condom, and laying that flat over the vulva. And so there's a barrier in between the vulva and the mouth. Sometimes whenever people are doing manual stimulation with hands, they'll wear gloves. So those are all options for STI protection. They're used less than a lot of times people will use protection in engaging in penetrative sex of like a penis and a vulva or a penis and an anus. But those are still definitely, there's lots of options out there. So internal condoms, dental dams, and gloves. All right.
All right, our next question is, how do you become a sex educator? So there is not like a full out process that you can, that you need to do to become a sex educator. Like I said in my introduction, I am a therapist. So no like technical sex education background. However, that's what I specialize in. I found a mentor, Karen Rain, who runs Unhushed, which a fast snippet. I don't think we said what Unhushed is. Unhushed is a nonprofit that is based out of here in Austin, Texas, and we teach elementary, middle school, and high school age students sex education. And our middle school and high school classes will be starting in the fall, and they'll all be online, so they'll be open to anyone in the country. So if anyone is interested in and joining our classes, go to unhush.org that E just dropped in the chat. And parent orientations will be happening soon. We're super excited. Jessica and I will be teaching the middle school class together, and me and Kristen, another sex educator, will be teaching the high school class together. So there are no like set parameters that you need. There are some certifications. The big certification is from the American Association for Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists. That is a mouthful. So they certify educators, counselors, and therapists in sexuality related topics. But I just found a mentor, Karen Rain, who works and founded Unhushed, and she really helped me with the teaching component, because teaching is very different from therapy. So she really showed me the ropes on that. But Jessica came from a different background.
Yeah, so I knew like coming out of undergrad that I wanted to do sex ed because I'd taken an amazing human sexuality course in college, and I was like, people are giving me information about my body and they're just handing this information out. This is the greatest feeling in the world. I want to feel this feeling forever. So I knew I wanted to do that. I ended up getting my master's in public health, so really looking at sexuality from a community perspective, and then got connected with Unhushed and Karen Rain, who is an absolute delight and wonder. And that was basically my journey. But there's also, if you're interested, there's a book called How I Got Into Sex ed or education, that goes into a bunch of different stories of sex educators and how they ended up finding their careers. It's a lot of like weird random journeys. We found out in a recent training we found out that a bunch of people came actually from animal science. That was their journey, from learning about livestock to teaching sex ed with people.
So don't worry about like your educational background or if you have all of the knowledge right now, because of course you're not going to. Most people who come into this field have a specific area of knowledge. Like, of course, mine is more of the social sex ed topics like gender and sexual orientation. Was more my specialty at the beginning of Jessica coming from a public health field, which made us a great team to teach sex ed together, is because we both were trained in basically like great counterparts in our background. And then you'll get it over time, which is why I said just really finding a mentor to help you along the way. And Jessica and I don't want to speak for you, Jessica, but I'm more than happy to answer questions. Please feel free to email me if you would like more guidance into this. And my email is ryan@unhush.org. And I would be more than happy to speak to anybody who's interested in coming into the sex ed world.
Yeah, definitely same for me. And mine's just jessica@unhush.org. But yeah, there's no wrong way to become a sex educator. Like, it's mostly about, I think the best sex educators are people that have a passion for it, obviously, and who are willing to grow and learn, because sexuality information changes so quickly. You definitely have to be in the mindset of, okay, I'm never going to know everything or even close to everything, but I can definitely be committed to the learning process.
Yeah. And there's not a group of people you have to want to teach. Like, if you don't want to teach children, elementary, middle school, or high school, you don't have to. You can just teach high school, or I mean, you can just teach college age students. You can just teach adults, because of course adults still need sex education. Since it's not widely taught in our country, there's still a lot of people who need that information. So our organization is primarily focused on youth. However, we do have books being published for adults as well, in that we have classes and trainings going in the United States, Spain, Turkey, China, and Mexico. So unhushed is quickly beginning to spread. So you just want to have a passion, like Jessica was saying, to teach people, and it doesn't have to be youth. If you just want to work with adults, that is perfectly okay.
Yeah, if you're interested in, there's a huge need for sex education among older adults. So like the rates of STIs are highest among like young adults, teens and young adults, but the like rates of increase in STIs are greatest among like people 55, 65 and older. So if like that's your jam, there's definitely a need for that. And it's this stuff's super fascinating.
So we're gonna move on, but like we said, please email us. E dropped our emails in the chat box, which E, you are up on it. You are super fast with this resource stuff, and I'm loving it. I've never had a tech person be like boom, 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 so I'm loving this. So our next question is, when speaking with a non-binary person, how should I address sexual organs such as a penis and a vagina? I'm concerned the conventional names may feel offensive. My intuition says just ask what the person is comfortable with. Any other suggestions? So before I answer this question, I want to make it very clear that when speaking about people in general, it's very difficult to give a specific answer. I may identify off the binary as a gender fluid person, but this is just going to be my perspective. I am of the mindset that it's always good to ask. If you can ask in a very respectful way, that it's okay to ask. And a lot of times people may not know they're uncomfortable with these words like penis, vulva, vagina. You may be one of the first people who they actually hear it out of somebody else's mouth from. So if you are comfortable asking if the language around genitals is penis and vulva, if they're comfortable with that, go ahead. Someone may correct you when you use them, and just take the drive by the person you're speaking to. Some people may not want to say the words or hear the words, and that may not be based off of their gender. It just may be being super uncomfortable with talking about sex-related topics and genital-related topics. So just go at it at a respectful way. And if usually people know that you're coming at it from a caring place, they respond that way as well. Starting a conversation, I always ask people across the board, let people know how I'm going to speak, and using language such as penis, vulva, and vagina, and use, of course, the scientific terms as educators. When asking for pronouns, I ask everyone, no matter the arena. So even if I know the person is very cis, I will still ask them their pronouns. One, because it gets the speaker used to asking people these questions. People are so focused on the mindset just to do it to queer people and off the binary people, that they have that mindset that this group of people are sensitive in some way, when that's not the case a lot of the time. So asking people, just everyone, what are they comfortable with? Like if you're speaking about genitals, if you're asking for pronouns, ask everyone that, because everyone should be asked that, because it gets you used to asking people these questions, but it also gets people used to being asked these questions, which is something that heterosexual cis people really need to get used to, is being asked these questions. So always come at it from a very respectful, kind place. And if someone corrects you for the language you're using, respond from a very respectful place. Remember to take a breath first, because a lot of times people forget to take a breath and it comes very defensive, your response is. So take a breath before responding and check in with yourself. I believe I answered that question. I feel like I went off in a couple different directions. I can really get going with gender because it's one of my favorite topics to talk about. So if I didn't answer the question fully, or if other questions came up from what I was saying, please drop it in the chat or in the Google form. We are monitoring that as well.
Yeah. Yes. We've actually had at least one question added since we started, which is great. Mm-hmm. Keep them coming. Okay, so I'll jump into the next question though. Is it normal to never orgasm? no matter how many times I've had sex or masturbated, I've never been able to. My BF, boyfriend, I'm assuming, has spent time trying to help, but it doesn't work. So the word normal has a lot of baggage to it. However, sorry, I got distracted by the chat. I'm not supposed to be looking at that. So the word normal has a lot of baggage around it in terms of, like, we all kind of have this feeling of like, I want to know if I'm normal or not. But I can tell you it's common that people will have issues like reaching orgasm. As like as a society, we have an idea of sex being very goal oriented. The way we talk about it, like even the slang terms we use. I know one of the examples people use, sorry, there's a fire station near my house. If you can hear the siren. One of the examples people use, though, is like whenever people talk about the bases in terms of having sex, like, oh, we got to space, usually refers to kissing. People have different terms for different bases. And then like second base might be like touching breast, blah, blah, blah. And it's very like step by step in this progression. And usually at the end of it, like the ultimate goal is orgasm, which is not necessarily the most productive way to think about sex. Because orgasms, most people are pretty like pro-orgasm. They think they're fun and nice. But it's not like the end-all be-all of sexuality and the human sexual experience. So it can kind of help reframe a little bit sometimes if you say like, okay, instead of going into sex, like I'm going to have an orgasm, more I'm going to enjoy myself. I'm going to enjoy my partner. I'm going to be immersed in this experience. And that actually can help if you take the focus off of when am I going to have an orgasm? I really want to have one of those. They sound like fun. I'd like to have one. Let's do this. Come on, body, let's go. If you take the focus off of that, it can actually make you more likely to have an orgasm, because anxiety is like one of the biggest killers of not the sexual response cycle exactly, but of your body can be like so overwhelmed with anxiety that it's like, okay, we're not doing an orgasm time right now. We're focused on freaking out. So you have like, if you can take your mind off of, okay, I need to have an orgasm, I really want to do this, I feel like everybody else is doing it, why can't I do it? If you can then say like, I'm just going to enjoy this whether or not I have an orgasm, that can actually help you reach orgasm, just because you're reducing that anxiety. But again, like, even though lots of people are like, hey, orgasms, they're great, and I think most people would agree they're not the end all be all, and you can still have like really pleasurable sexual experiences without an orgasm coming into play. Is there anything you'd add to that?
No, I think that was comprehensive and great. So we have a follow-up question to the question I answered before Jessica's, and it is, can you give us an example of how the question around what to call genitals might sound, maybe in a couple different contexts? So when we're in a teaching context, Jessica and I say on the first day that we use scientific terms for, like we speak in scientific terms, not slang or anything such as that. But of course, that's a very educational side, but we set it up so people know the type of language we're going to use. So people know that we're going to use the words like penis, vulva, vagina. In a more personal one-on-one context, I think that question can come up many different ways. Like, you know, the conversation would say a child, a friend is leaning that direction, and they are uncomfortable with it. You can be like, I feel like our conversations drifted more toward genitals. Are you comfortable with that? And first, just checking in if the person is comfortable with having that conversation. And be like, are you comfortable with biological terms for genitals? I'm a big proponent of using terms, especially with like small kids, and not calling it like a PP or a JJ, like using penis and vagina, because it destigmatizes the words and empowers people to use them. However, if someone is on a path of exploring or questioning their gender and maybe experiencing dysphoria, those words can be very triggering. So asking and just making sure first that they're comfortable with the conversation, because somebody may not want to have the conversation, and checking in with that first, and then seeing what language they want to use and being like, is this language okay? And if they're like, I'm not sure, check in and be like, is there language you'd prefer to use? Or what would make you most comfortable to use in this conversation? Because some people who experience a lot of hardships will probably want to have the conversation, but the words themselves may be difficult to use. And that can come in many different contexts. Maybe they don't want to use the words themselves, but may be comfortable with hearing other people use the words. Or it could be vice versa, where they are comfortable with using the words, but not comfortable with other people. So checking in with that to see where people's comfort level is, going along the lines. But with kids, I'm always very big proponent as kids grow up calling body parts what they are. That's usually how we build stigma around words and language, and actually being able to call things when they're adults, or being able to have in-depth conversations, or the stigma around sex and bodies is how early was that language being used? Like, can a child, when a parent is talking about body parts, say the word penis and like, the adults in the room don't freak out, which a lot of times it's not like, if as a sex educator, I forget that, you know, I'm from like small town Kentucky, and going in small town Kentucky and hearing like my nibbling say, fun fact, nibbling is a gender neutral term for like niece or nephew, and it's just super cute. Hearing my nibbling say penis, and like all the adults in the room like freeze and be like, what? We don't use that language. And I'm like, why? What's wrong with that language? And we just dropped another question: what would be, or what good substitutions for PP or vajayjay would be? Penis and vulva. I'm a very big proponent of, like, we teach children like their nose, their eyes, their ears. We can teach penis in vulva as well. It's a little scary for adults because those are, we see those as very personal words, but that's how you set up like a boundary conversation for the future, and what consent is about, talking about or using the words in the body parts for them. A lot of times using them with children, it's adults getting past their own barriers of using words for genitals, and not the children themselves, because when you teach a young child the word penis, they don't have the cultural connotations and connections that adults have. So you just taught them a word, just like when you taught them nose. It's the same to them, but it can be very triggering to adults, and adults feel like it's too mature to use those language. But if children can use other terms for body parts, there's no difference for using all terms for all body parts. Would you add anything, Jessica?
Yeah, so I know, like, from experience, I did a sex ed class. It was a 5-session, and I'll actually get into part of this in another question. But it was with pre-K kids, or it was like ages 3 to 5, and we went over anatomy. And it was so funny to watch, like, this group of 3 to 5-year-olds. I would be going through and I was like, here's a penis, here's a clitoris. And like the adults in the room were mortified and were like, what is happening? Kids couldn't care less. Like they were like, okay, whatever. I had one that, because I went in and I was like, okay, today we're going to talk about bodies. And my little elementary school teacher, like, voice that is actually just my regular voice. And so I was like, oh, we're going to learn about bodies. I showed these pictures, like kids pictures of like, here's genitals. And this one little girl sighs and it's like, you always teach us about bodies. When are you going to teach us about like shapes? It's like, sorry, I'll try to work in something about triangles next time. But they were like, okay, those are body parts. Cool, love it. Like, they did laugh whenever we talked about, the anus was where poop comes out, because poop is very funny, but they were not fazed at all by using like biological terms.
Mm-hmm. and we see like the confidence of being able to talk about bodies really is there when people are older and being able to be used to the words from a young age and see adults modeling the behavior that the words aren't scary, and that they're just words, and they're just body parts, if that's done at a young age, which is nice to see that confidence going up as well. So, oh, I thought I saw somebody typing. Any other questions? Anybody want to drop into the chat? I thought I saw a number come up somewhere, but I guess I didn't see one come up on my screen.
We have some in the little or we have one in the Q&A box.
No,
Yeah,
But-
so
I've never
there's
used
one
the
more
Q&A.
question in the Google form
Yeah.
about STIs, and so if we want to do that one, and then we can move to the question in the Q&A.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh, I've never heard it. Tried Q&A before. All right. You want to take the STI one, Jessica?
Yeah, or actually real quick, I've got another one that was in the first batch of questions from the form that actually goes really well with the one we just answered, which is, how do I describe groomer/pedophilia to children I care about? So this is obviously going to depend on your relationship to the child, but if you are like a caregiver, the way actually we had, because I had 5 sessions with these pre-K kids that was all about consent. And so the way that we ended up having that conversation is we started out with, you have a body, and that's great, love it, super good. And then we talked about like, okay, and you have a right to say what you like about your body and like what feels good and what doesn't feel good and what boundaries you want and what ones you don't want. And of course we have to complicate that a little because they're kids. You know, I'll ask them like, oh, if it's snowing outside and you decide you want to wear a swimsuit and your parents say no, like, should you be allowed to wear the swimsuit? And they're like, no, that's ridiculous. They're able to see like, okay, there's sometimes where a parent's going to have to step in because they're in charge of my health and safety. But for the most part, you know, when we talk about like, hey, you don't need to give somebody a hug if you don't want to. And so making sure they know what those rights are is really important. And, oh, sorry, before that, we all go into actually saying anatomical terms of genitalia. So like we'll do head, shoulders, knees, and toes. And then we go into, okay, what body parts didn't we mention? Let's talk about genitalia. Let's talk about, usually like that's the stuff that we don't show to a lot of people. And this is, you know, but we need to know the names for all of our body parts and what's going on with those so we know how to talk about them. And we can say like, oh, this part of my body like hurts, or, you know, I don't want you to touch me there, different things like that. And making that conversation normalized, because kids for the most part are not getting that. Like if you look at a lot of kids, like little kids anatomy books, the crotch will just be blank. Like there will be nothing there. And it'll be like, oh, you have a nose, here's a stomach, then there's some knees. Like we're just gonna skip this middle section, which is like in its absence is definitely giving kids the message like that's not something you talk about. And it gets all this weird cultural baggage. So giving them that language to talk about their bodies, telling them like, hey, this is what consent is, and you have the right to say like, yes, this feels good, I like this. No, this doesn't feel good, I don't want that. So yes, I want a hug right now, or no, I don't want a hug right now. And then we go into like being able to hear that from other people and listening to what they want. And then finally we do talk about, okay, if there's a violation of consent, what are the steps that you can take and what should you expect? And usually like the way I like to do that is, you know, if there's a violation of consent, it's not your fault. Absolutely not. If somebody didn't listen to you, that's their fault and they did something wrong. And if you report that and talk to an adult, you should be met with care and respect and compassion, and that person should do everything they can to make sure that your safety is being upheld. So letting them know that, number one, this wasn't your fault. This bad thing happened to you. That sucks. But you didn't do anything to make it happen. And two, if you do report it to an adult that you trust and that you care about, what you should expect is that they respond like appropriately and supportively, and that if they don't respond that way, that's also not your fault. So I like to set up the conversation that way, where you're kind of building to, hey, if there's somebody that doesn't respect your boundaries and does something that makes you feel unsafe, here are concrete things that you can do. Here's a person you can talk to, and here's what you should expect to happen afterwards. But it's also built on the idea of empowering the kid with the knowledge that, their body is their own. They get to decide what feels good and what doesn't. And they have rights in that arena.
Mm-hmm.
So that just building off of that's one of the big reasons that using anatomical language from an early age is good, because you give kids language to, if there is a violation of consent, like hopefully there isn't, but if there is, they're able to say like, oh, someone touched my penis and I was not okay with that, and I need an adult to come in and fix the situation.
So our next question is, what are the benefits of masturbation? So to start off, masturbation is completely normal and healthy. People masturbate for different reasons, and there are different amounts people masturbate. Like, I feel like one of the most common questions we get asked by middle school or high school age students are like, how often is it normal to masturbate? There's not an answer to that. People do it different amounts for different reasons. Masturbation itself is a great way for people to explore their own bodies and understand their own androgynous zones. So what parts of their body bring them sexual pleasure. I said androgynous. Woo! Yes, sorry. So it allows people to get to know their body and what they what areas bring them sexual excitement, what areas do they not like, and that can be done while masturbating. It also helps relieve stress for a lot of people. It can be a natural painkiller for some people. Again, not all people, but some people masturbate when on their periods because it can relieve period cramps. Again, not for all people, for some people. It is, of course, the way not to get an STI or pregnant is if you are masturbating alone. Mutual masturbation with a partner can be a way to explore each other's bodies. So there are a lot of different benefits to masturbation. Masturbation is one of those other topics that should be discussed as something completely normal and healthy to young people, because there's a lot of cultural stigma with masturbation, and being able to get through that with youth and being able to be like, this is a natural and healthy part of being a person. Some people don't like masturbating. Some people like masturbating a lot. And both are completely fine. And there is a lot in between those two. And we see a lot of young people be very nervous about, am I not masturbating enough? Does that make me weird? Or am I doing it way too much? And that just makes me super weird. But being able to take those fears and being like, it's completely normal to masturbate for different reasons and for different amounts throughout your entire life. So some people may do it, masturbate more when they're younger and less when they're older, but for a lot of people, they see that switched where they masturbate less when they're younger and a lot more when they're older. Masturbation is just a part of life, and there are some people who just do it a lot throughout their entire lifespan, and some people who don't do it a lot throughout their entire lifespan as well. And it is completely normal and healthy to not like masturbation as well. We get those questions as well, like, I don't find masturbation stimulating or sexually pleasing. Is that weird? It's not weird. So at the same time of being able to normalize that actually masturbating normal, that not masturbating is normal as well. Anything to add, Jessica?
And also, like, even because people will be like, oh, how do you define masturbation? And sometimes people will define it so broadly that it's like anything you do that gives you physical pleasure. And then some people will be like, oh, it's like engaging in physical, like, activities that pleasure you sexually or that, like, specifically involve the genitalia. But it involves different things for different people. And yeah, the only time where I would say it ever goes into the range of harmful is like if you're masturbating so much that it's causing physical harm. So yeah, if there's chafing happening, it's probably time to take a break. But other than that, like, it's a normal part of the human experience, whether you do it or not. Sorry, there's
you want to get the STI question in the form?
Yeah. So next question, how common are STIs? Does catching or having an STI make someone a slut or a sinner? How can someone with an incurable STI have a normal sex life? So first part of that question, how common are STIs? Very common. So like I mentioned, herpes earlier is very easy to transmit, and you can have it either on your mouth or your genitals. And there's two versions of the virus, but either one, herpes simplex 1 and herpes simplex 2, but both can be present on the mouth or the genitalia and can be transferred from one to the other. When you count the people with oral herpes, over 2/3 of the population has, like, in the world has herpes. So yeah, STIs, super duper common. That one's probably, well, HPV is more prevalent than that one technically. But they're very common. Having an STI doesn't say anything about who you are as a person. Just like having the flu doesn't mean anything about who you are as a person. You're just a person who has the flu. That's it. It doesn't say anything about your moral character, your ethics, nothing. So definitely it doesn't make someone a slut or a sinner at all. And then finally, how can somebody with an incurable STI have a normal sex life? So there are some STIs that you can take medicine for and they go away. However, like with viral STIs, for the most part, those stay and live in your body. However, there are now medications that you can take that will reduce symptoms of STIs and actually make it to where, like, there's medication that people with HIV take, that's PEP, right, Ryan? Yeah, so PEP will reduce the viral load in your body so that, number one, there's so little of the virus that it's not impacting your personal health, and it also makes it virtually impossible to transmit that to someone else. So there are definitely lots of options out there for protection that you can use in terms of condoms and different things, medications you can use to help reduce the risk of transmission. And then there's also absolutely resources out there for disclosing and speaking with a potential partner, saying like, hey, here's what's going on. Like, I have HIV. Right now, I have it, like, I'm on medication, so it's at an undetectable level in my body. The transmission rate is low to none. And we can also, though, we can use condoms. We can make sure that you get testing. You can be on PrEP. And there's ways that you can definitely engage in sexual activity that are safe for you and your partner, regardless of STI status. Anything to add to that, Ryan?
No.
All right.
We're going to jump over to the Q&A. I'm trying to answer these as order as they come in.
Sorry, there's one more in the
form, but the Q&A came first. I'm trying to
get
to them as they come in. So this question is it bad that I don't think gender or sex are real? It feels like everybody else makes a big deal about being a man, woman, non-binary person, but I just don't understand why it's important. Is gender and sex actually real, or is it all just a social construct? To me, the difference between males and females is as shallow as different hair color. So there's a couple ones that I'm going to pick out of there. So sex and gender can be defined differently. Biological sex is definitely more than just male or female. That's what we tend to boil it down to, but it is not just male or female. People have eliminated the existence of trans or as intersex people for centuries, and there are a lot more to biological sex than just male or female.
Certain cultures have erased their identities. There's others that have acknowledged them.
Yes, exactly. The idea of gender itself, that's a debate if it's a social construct. Even if it is a social construct, that doesn't mean that it's not important to people anymore. So gender allows us to find community. Throughout history, it has been a way to oppress people, to harm people. Now, as we grow and we learn more about gender, and gender is being more spoke about, it's creating all of these communities where people can find each other and feel safe in. That's why you hear a lot of conservative people get very upset about all of the gender identities, like gender fluid, non-binary, trans, and the list can go on. And they're upset that it seems to be more keeps popping up. However, that is how people can find community. And it's very important for people and off the binary and all queer communities to find each other in any marginalized community, to be able to find each other and feel safety, feel like you're a part of a family. So that is why they're very, very important. If someone is heterosexual and cisgender and they don't really understand about the queer community, it's just important to be very respectful, and that just because something is a social construct doesn't mean it's not very, very, very rooted in our culture. And it can be very detrimental to people, but as the queer community and all marginalized communities have done with social constructs that affect their own communities, they found ways to build communities around it and build family systems around it, which is why it's very, very important for those marginalized communities to have those identities, because they allow us to find those families and to find home, which is why things like pronouns are very important. Things like pride flags are very important, is because there is such a history around not having an identity and having them stripped away, and being hurt and brutalized and murdered for having those identities, that when you have the power you can in society, in a culture, to actually grasp those and be recognized, that's the importance of grasping them. And the importance of being an ally and an advocate is realizing that importance, and making sure that marginalized communities have that space where they can have that safety and community.
Yeah, I think the way that I personally view it, this is the Jessica definition of gender theory, is that there's lots and lots of valid debate out there about what gender is and how it's conceptualized and what its function is. And there are these very large social ideas and philosophical ideas that I think are really, like, I personally find very fun to play with. I think that's very interesting. But then there's also the internal lived experience of one's own gender. And for me, it's, I can play around with gender concepts all day. That's fun. Love it. But I also want to recognize that someone's own experience of their gender is their experience, and I want to support that and celebrate that 100%. Mm-hmm. So what your gender means to you, great. Love it. Super. So we can have these big ideas about gender, which is very fun. And it's like, you drop something in the chat too. But that, the lived experience, I think, is one of the more important parts when we were talking about supporting specific people or supporting yourself as you understand your own gender identity. If you're interested in more around that dialogue, the author Julia Serrano, I think, touches on that really beautifully in a lot of her work. I'm going to drop her name in the chat box real quick.
So we have...
Yeah, we're almost out of time.
So we have really good resources on Unhushed. We have a gender identity person and a sexual orientation identity person that is free to download. We also put together sexual orientation and gender dictionaries that are free to download if you go to our website in the resource section, which can be really good. And there are a lot of books out there as well. Like one of my favorite ones is queer graphic history or queer graphic novel. I can't remember which one, but it's just a really visually amazing book with a lot of good information on it as well. And I think I hand that one to a lot of people. And then there's also one that I love, and I'm going to plug it because it's by two of my favorite people in the world. It's called Trans, Love, Sex, Romance, and Being You, by Dr. Karen Rain from Unhushed and Catherine Gonzalez from Out Youth. It's a fantastic book that I highly suggest everyone look at. So we have 2 questions left and not a lot of time, so I'm going to try to answer them. So yes, this question is, how do you have sex with trans people without causing dysphoria for them? My girlfriend is trans and I want to have sex with her, but I don't know how. So just like when you're having sex with anybody, communication is key. When you're going to have sex for the first time and ongoing through your relationship, sit down with this person and talk to them. A lot of, as again, not speaking for everyone who has a lived trans and off the binary experiences, but it's very important to sit down and talk about sex with somebody that you're going to have sex with or are having sex with. A lot of people will know what could cause dysphoria for them, and they can let you know before you have sex. But there's also a possibility that people will not know what could bring on dysphoria during sex. So it's important to sit down and communicate that if someone does experience dysphoria while having sex, what can you do? How can you support them? What do they need if that does occur? Because some people can, like I said, can tell what may cause dysphoria, but a lot of times that someone's having sex, they may not know it beforehand. So sitting down and having that open communication, like if this does occur, what support do you think you may need? And having some things in place that if dysphoria does happen, that it's readily accessible. Some people may not want physical contact if dysphoria comes up in sex. Some people may just want to be held if dysphoria comes up, which is why the importance to have this conversation before having sex is very important. I think I answered that question. I'm not going to go into technical of how you have sex with trans people because I don't think this is the arena for that because yeah, it's very different for each person. So make sure you have the conversation before having sex, and that goes for anyone. Before you have sex with anyone, sit down with that partner and have that conversation. So you are more comfortable with each other and you know each other's like do's and don'ts beforehand. And be open that a lot of people may not know their do's and don'ts or dysphoria triggers before having sex, because those can be different for different partners. So just being open to it. So I hope I answered that question as fully as I could.
And also, like, just real quick, if possible, or anybody you know, you yourself, or trans, it can be really helpful to seek out a community of other trans people where you can have dialogues like this. Like, okay, how do you deal with dysphoria during sex? Do you experience that? What's it like? And having a group where that dialogue is part of the group norm and accepted, to have somebody that, like, okay, you know what I'm going through. We can talk about this and laugh and make jokes and, you know, have a nice communal experience with this.
Mhm. There are some good books about these experiences. Catherine and Karen's that I just talked about before, Trans Love, Sex, Romance, and Being You is a fantastic resource for this as well. Life Isn't Binary by Alex Ian Taffy, I think, is how you say his last name. And then Meg John Barker are just amazing authors. I love everything by Meg John Barker. They are fantastic. So yeah, I'm going to go on to our last question, which is on the Q&A. How do you set up the stage for talking about sex ed with teenagers? We are starting a sex ed programming for our LGBTQ plus based organization and wanted some advice on what to expect when teens who commonly stigmatize sexual terms and sexuality. So that is definitely going to happen whenever you talk about sex and sexuality with teens. There's going to be jokes flying around. It's just going to happen. I'm a big believer in humor, in that the facilitators should use humor as long as, you know, it's appropriate humor, and that you're still giving factual information in that humor. One of the first activities we do in our sex ed classes is a language-based activity. So we give a scientific biological term and we split them up in the groups, and we ask each group to come up with a group name, but then we ask them to come up with as many slang terms for that word, like penis, as possible within 90 seconds. And it's just a really fun game. It allows them to get all of that out of their system. And then after the 90 seconds is up, we have them read them out loud. That way is that they can see the facilitators aren't going to cringe when they use some of the slang terms, that they're not going to get in trouble for using that type of language. And it will create a really good bonding experience and rapport experience for the class. It gets everybody loosened up. And it lets everybody know that we understand that as students and as young people, that they may not have all of the biological terms that we have. So we want them to be able to bring whatever language they have to the table. We'll reflect the biological terminology to it, but they can bring whatever language they have to the table. Bringing through the question to make sure that I cover everything, but teenagers are a fun group to work with. Like we've just discovered, like they want to have these conversations, and a lot of the times having those conversations are easier through humor. So as long as you're meeting them on that level and making sure that you get the correct information to them is the most important part. One of the things I love about teaching with Unhushed is that all of our curriculum is very comprehensive and inclusive. So we have specific sections about LGBTQ community, and we make sure to put it in there as we go along, so that LGBTQ kids feel very accepted, and that it's not just biologically driven, which is the very limited part of a lot of sex ed that is taught, is that it's just biologically driven, and only biologically driven with male and female, which is limiting itself. So meeting them where they're at, not being afraid to use humor yourself. As you can see, like when Jessica and I are here, we like to giggle and we like to laugh, and we can do that as well. And that if there is an appropriate joke that is made, not engaging in that and being able to reflect on what was wrong with that. Which is the fun part about the language game at the beginning of the class, is because when some of the very derogatory slurs and slang are used, we can address that then and throughout the class. Jessica?
Yeah, so I think definitely making it fun, doing anything you can to promote participant buy-in. So beforehand, asking what topics that they might be interested in, whether or not that's going to drive the content you deliver, being able to say like, hey, what are you interested in learning about? Maybe we can focus on some of those topics. Additionally, I know we're running out of time, but to wrap it all up in a nice, beautiful bow, anonymous questions are the best tool in the world for sex ed, because no matter what you're planning on presenting, you're able to have students bring you the information, like the questions that are most important to them in that very moment. And they might seem like minuscule to you, but they might be like, this is the only thing I care about learning today. I am sweating in weird places that I wasn't before. What is going on? Please save me. And you answer that question, and that can definitely like lend itself to having a lot of trust in the process and as you as an educator, and knowing like, okay, there is information here that is important to me, and the person who's delivering this information actually cares that I have it.
We love consulting on this kind of stuff. I've helped a couple LGBTQ based organizations with their sex ed curriculum. So please feel free to email Jessica and I, or you can email the General Unhushed if you would just like to connect with the entire organization. And that email is info@unhushed.org. I want to be respectful of everyone's time since we're at 5:01. So if we didn't answer any question, please let us know. Email us. We like to be as accessible as possible. And thank you for having us.
Yes.
Thank y'all so much for joining us. That was incredible. I feel like we totally could have scheduled another hour to get into all kinds of other conversations as well. And we totally welcome feedback. I just put the form in the chat. We would love to hear your thoughts on this session or any other Q Plus EDU session that you've been to. And we really appreciate you joining us today. E, do you know what our next sessions are scheduled for?
Yes, our next session is about safety planning around being kicked out. It's on Tuesday, July 28th at 7 p.m. and the link is in the chat. And I'm also going to plug our donation link because things cost money, and we offer all of our speakers payment just to make sure that they're valued for the time and labor that they put into this project. So if you'd like to support our ability to continue paying our speakers, please feel free to make a donation of any amount at the link that I just dropped in the chat. But yeah, thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you to Jessica and Ryan. This was amazing. Loved it. Such a great conversation.
Yeah, this was absolutely fantastic. And we do have a couple of other sessions that we have done previously on sex stuff. So we have one on accessing sexual health care from folks at the Kind Clinic. And then we also did one with Jane's Due Process on how minors in Texas can access reproductive justice, including abortion without parental consent. So there's lots of different things to cover in this, but we are so, so grateful for Unhushed. Jessica, Ryan, y'all are amazing. Thank you so much. We are super grateful that y'all were here with us today. And yeah, hope everybody has a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.